Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us.
It's good to be here.
Today we're going to be tackling Exodus chapter 34.
Oh, yeah, a big one.
Yeah, and specifically focusing on the Sinai covenant.
Lots to unpack there.
We're going to be using some interpretations that we found in My Christian Space
Okay, Phil.
to help us kind of go through it and understand the significance.
Sounds good.
And I think you guys are going to be pretty surprised with some of the things that we found.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
for example, did you know that the number 13 pops up in a fascinating way in the attributes of God?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and wait until you hear about what Moshe's face did after he spent time with God.
I am intrigued.
Yeah, you and me both. Okay, so let's just jump right in.
Okay.
So we start with this dramatic scene, right?
What?
Where Moses smashes the first set of tablets because of the golden calf incident.
Right. Yeah, a powerful visual.
Oh, it's so powerful, right?
Yeah.
And then God tells him to carve 2 new tablets himself.
Uh-huh.
Why the emphasis on Moses doing the carving?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it suggests that, there's a human element in preparing for a restored relationship with God.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not just, passively receiving God's grace.
Right.
But there's this active participation, a willingness to put in the work, so to speak.
I like that. Yeah, co-creating the space.
Yeah, exactly.
For that connection. And then this time, as he ascends Mount Sinai, he's totally alone.
Wow.
Even the animals are kept away.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Really sets the stage for this powerful moment.
For sure. It emphasizes the sacredness of the encounter between God and Moses. This
Yeah.
one-on-one moment of divine revelation. It's like God is saying, this is between us,
Yes.
and it demands your undivided attention.
And then God descends in a cloud,
Okay.
proclaiming his name, which, as My Christian Space points out,
Yeah.
is more than just a label.
Right.
It's a revelation of his very character.
He's not just, giving Moses his business card or something,
Right.
but he's revealing his essence, his nature. And what's so striking is that his name is directly linked to these qualities like mercy, compassion, grace, and truth.
Yes.
It's like God is saying, this is who I am and this is how I interact with the world.
And My Christian Space makes this really interesting point about the number of attributes listed.
Uh-huh.
There are 13.
Okay.
And that number in Jewish thought symbolizes unity.
Oh, that's a fascinating connection.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it suggests that these attributes are intertwined.
Yeah.
They form like this complete and unified whole.
It's not just that God is merciful and compassionate, but that his mercy eye is compassionate.
Right, exactly. It's all one.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's where things get a little bit
Okay.
complex.
Okay.
My Christian Space dives into this concept of sin being rooted in genetics,
Oh, okay.
that the consequences of a father's sins can impact future generations.
Uh-huh.
And they even draw a parallel to Adam's sin
Right.
and how it impacts all of humanity.
Yeah, that's a concept that has been debated for centuries.
Yeah, for sure.
And it raises a lot of questions about free will. To be fair, there are multiple interpretations of what inherited sin actually means. Like Augustine believed it's like a literal inheritance, like
Yeah.
a stain passed down from Adam.
Okay.
Others, like Pelagius, really emphasized free will and personal responsibility.
So it's an ongoing theological conversation.
It is.
It's not cut and dry.
Yeah.
But it does make you think,
Yeah.
how much are we shaped by the choices
Mm.
of those who came before us?
Right.
And what kind of legacy are we passing down?
That's a good question.
It's a big one. Yeah.
It challenges us to consider the interconnectedness of humanity,
Right.
both in terms of our shared history and our shared responsibility.
So we have Moses, up on Mount Sinai,
Yeah.
witnessing this incredible revelation of God's character.
Mm-hmm.
What's his immediate response?
I'm listening.
Falls down and worships.
Of course.
Not because he's expecting something in return,
Right,
but
right.
simply because he recognizes God's inherent worthiness.
That's true worship right there.
Yeah.
It's that pure expression of awe and reverence. True worship at its core isn't about getting something from God.
Right.
It's about recognizing who he is and responding with humility and gratitude.
And Moses acknowledges that it's only by God's grace that he and the Israelites could even be in God's presence.
It's true.
It's like he's saying, we don't deserve this, but you've chosen to make us your own.
Yeah, it highlights that incredible paradox of our relationship with God.
Yes.
God, in his infinite greatness, desires this relationship with us.
Right.
Flawed and fragile as we are,
Yeah.
he chooses to dwell among us not because we've earned it, but because of his boundless love and grace.
And it's within this context of worship and grace that God establishes the Sinai covenant.
Right, a promise of something new and awesome for the Israelites.
Yes, starting with those 2 stone tablets.
Yeah, the Sinai Covenant really marks a turning point.
Yeah.
It's that formal agreement where God outlines his promises and the responsibilities of his people. It's like a blueprint for a new kind of relationship built on mutual commitment and trust.
And part of that commitment involves conquering the land of Canaan.
Right, driving out the existing inhabitants.
There's a catch,
Oh, what's that?
a big one.
Okay.
The Israelites are forbidden from making any covenants with them.
Why such a strict rule?
Because God knows that exposure to other cultures and beliefs can lead to turning away from him.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's like he's saying you can't serve 2 masters.
Choose me and me alone.
Yes, and My Christian Space uses this incredibly vivid analogy
Okay.
of a landmine
Oh, wow.
to describe the danger of not fully rooting out Canaanite idolatry.
It's like this hidden danger just waiting to explode and wreak havoc.
Yes, it can creep in so subtly
Right.
and undermine the entire foundation of faith.
And that's not just an ancient issue either.
No.
I mean, even today we're bombarded with messages and ideologies that can pull us away from our faith.
Right, it's a constant challenge.
And to discern what aligns with God's truth and what doesn't.
Okay, so let's dive into some of the specifics of the Sinai Covenant.
Okay.
There's a strong emphasis on observing certain feasts,
Right.
starting with the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Right. That commemorates the Israelites' hasty escape from Egypt.
Yes.
They didn't even have time to let their bread rise.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder of their liberation from slavery to freedom.
And My Christian Space connects the Feast of Unleavened Bread to the concept of the firstborn,
Oh, interesting.
which ultimately points to Jesus
Uh-huh.
and his sacrifice on the cross.
It's amazing how these Old Testament events and rituals foreshadow the New Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah, the unleavened bread, a symbol of purity and haste, becomes a foreshadowing of Christ, the perfect sacrifice
Right.
offered in our place.
It's like peeking into the future.
Yeah.
Okay, next we have the Sabbath,
Okay.
that day of rest
Uh-huh.
that God commands the Israelites to observe,
Right.
even during busy times like plowing and harvest.
It's more than just a break from work, though.
Hmm.
It's a reminder that our salvation doesn't depend on our efforts,
Right.
but on God's grace. It's a recognition that God is the ultimate provider and we can rest in his provision.
It's a powerful countercultural message.
It is in a world that's constantly pushing us to do more, be more, achieve more.
Right.
The Sabbath is like a radical act of defiance.
Yes.
It's a declaration that our worth isn't tied to our productivity,
Right.
but to our identity as God's beloved children.
So good. I love that.
Yeah.
Then we have these 3 annual feasts where all the men are required to travel to Jerusalem to appear before God.
Oh, wow. Talk about commitment.
I know, right? We're talking about the Feast of Weeks and the Feast of Tabernacles.
Okay.
These pilgrimages were a way for the Israelites to reaffirm their covenant relationship with God
Okay.
and to experience unity as a nation.
Mhm.
And God promises to protect their land while they're away.
Wow. That's a powerful demonstration of trust.
Yes, he's saying, go worship me without fear. I've got this.
Yeah, what a testament to God's faithfulness and provision.
My Christian Space points out something really interesting.
What's that?
They say that 3 different names for God are used in this passage,
Huh.
hinting that these feasts have significance across past, present, and future.
That's a great observation.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, what might these feasts prefigure?
Right. What deeper truths are hidden within these rituals?
Okay, let's zoom in on some of the smaller details,
Okay.
like the instruction not to offer the blood of a sacrifice with leavened bread, or to boil a young goat in its mother's milk.
Uh-huh.
Why such specific rules?
Right. What's the big deal?
Well, these might seem like arbitrary details,
Yeah.
but they point to a deeper principle,
Okay.
paying attention to the specifics of God's commands.
Interesting.
It's not just about the big picture. It's about aligning even the smallest actions
Wow.
with God's will.
Okay.
And My Christian Space suggests these instructions are about avoiding pagan idolatry.
Oh, okay.
They say that these practices were likely associated with Canaanite rituals, and God's drawing a clear line between his ways and the ways of the surrounding nations.
So it reinforces the idea that true worship involves a separation from the beliefs and practices of those who don't follow God.
Right. It's about choosing to live differently,
Yeah.
to set oneself apart.
And that's not just an ancient thing either.
No.
We're constantly surrounded by influences that might try to pull us away from our faith.
For sure.
So it's a reminder to be vigilant,
yes.
discerning and grounded in our faith.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So even seemingly minor details can have spiritual significance.
They can.
It's a reminder that we need to approach God's commands with humility
Yeah.
and a willingness to obey, even when we don't fully understand the reasons behind them.
It's about cultivating a posture of obedience, trusting that God's ways are ultimately for our good,
Yes.
even when they challenge our understanding.
Okay, after receiving all these instructions, Moses spends 40 days and nights on Mount Sinai,
Wow.
a period of intense communion with God. And as my Christian space points out, the number 40
Uh-huh.
is often associated with change and transformation in the Bible.
Yeah, that's right. Think about Noah and the flood,
Right.
the Israelites wandering in the wilderness, Jesus fasting in the desert.
Yes.
All 40-day periods that mark significant transitions
Yes.
and spiritual growth.
So it's no coincidence that during this 40-day period, the 10 Commandments are inscribed on the new stone tablets.
Yeah.
And these commandments aren't just arbitrary rules.
Right.
They're meant to shape the Israelites' character,
Yes.
to transform them into a people who reflect God's holiness and justice.
The 10 Commandments are like a blueprint for righteous living, a foundation for a society built on principles of love, respect, and accountability.
And then we come to one of the most visually striking scenes in Exodus.
Okay.
Moses descending from the mountain, his face radiating light.
Oh, yeah, like a spiritual makeover.
Right.
Yeah, it's a powerful image of the transformative power of encountering God's presence. That radiance is a physical manifestation of the spiritual reality that Moses has experienced.
But there's a twist.
Okay.
This radiant glow actually freaks out the Israelites.
Oh, no.
They're afraid to approach Moses.
I can understand that.
Right.
I mean, think about it. The sheer power and holiness of God reflected in Moses' face.
Yes.
It's both awe-inspiring and terrifying.
Yes.
It's a reminder that we're finite beings standing before an infinite God.
So what does Moses do?
What does he do?
He puts on a veil
Okay.
to cover his shining face when speaking to the people.
Uh-huh.
But, and here's the crucial detail,
Okay.
he removes the veil when he's in God's presence.
Interesting. So what's the significance of this veil?
Well, the veil is a fascinating symbol
Yeah.
with multiple layers of interpretation.
Okay.
It could represent the fear and awe that naturally arise when we encounter the divine.
I mean, even Moses, who had such a close relationship with God, needed that visual separation.
It's like that feeling you get when you're standing at the edge of a vast canyon or looking up at a star-filled sky.
Yo.
You're overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of it all, and a part of you wants to shield yourself from that intensity.
That makes sense.
And on a deeper level, the veil could symbolize the limitations of human perception when trying to grasp the fullness of God's glory.
Right. We're finite beings, and God is infinite.
We can only glimpse fragments of his truth like reflections in a mirror.
So the veil becomes a necessary barrier,
Right.
protecting us from being overwhelmed by a reality that's beyond our capacity to fully comprehend.
We're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we'll continue exploring this whole symbolism of the veil and what it might mean for us today.
Okay, sounds good.
Stay tuned.
I will.
Welcome back. We're diving deeper into this whole veil thing from Exodus 34. What other interpretations does my Christian space offer about the veil?
Well, one thing they suggest is that the veil might represent like that fear and awe that we naturally feel, in the presence of the divine.
Yeah.
Even Moses, needed that buffer, that visual separation.
I can totally relate to that feeling.
Ah.
Have you ever just felt like awestruck and kind of fearful at the same time when you think about the vastness of God?
Absolutely. And, this is Moses we're talking about.
Right.
He had such a close relationship with God.
Yeah.
So if he needed that separation, it really makes you think about our own human limitations. My Christian space also points out that the veil could symbolize those very limitations, especially when we try to grasp the fullness of God's glory.
It's like trying to fit the ocean into a teacup.
Exactly. We can only glimpse fragments of God's truth. It's like reflections in a mirror.
And that makes you appreciate why the veil was necessary.
Yeah.
Like almost like a safety measure.
That's a great way to put it. It's like God in his love and wisdom is saying, I know you can't handle the full intensity of my presence right now. So here's a filter, but there's another layer to this whole veil symbolism that my Christian space delves into, and that's the concept of mediation.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, Moses, with his veiled face, he becomes this mediator between God and the people he's communicating God's word, but he's also filtering it through the lens of human understanding.
That's an interesting take on it. It makes me think about how religious leaders and even scriptures themselves can kind of act as veils in a way.
Oh, how so?
Well, they can help us access God's truth. But,
Yeah.
They can also maybe sometimes unintentionally obscure it or distort it.
That's a really good point. It's a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is.
We need guides and interpretations to help us navigate, the complexities of faith, but we also need to be aware of the limitations of human understanding
Right.
and the potential for, misinterpretations.
It's like that saying, we see through a glass darkly.
Right.
There's always going to be a little bit of mystery and uncertainty when we're dealing with the divine.
And that's okay. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting God even when we don't fully understand.
Now, what about the act of removing the veil when Moses is in God's presence?
Yeah. My Christian space seemed to think there's something really important there.
What do they say?
Well, I think it speaks to the importance of authenticity and vulnerability in our relationship with God. When we come before him, we're not supposed to put on a show or pretend to be something we're not. We're invited to be real, to lay bare our hearts and minds, even the messy parts.
So it's like taking off a mask and allowing God to see us as we truly are.
Exactly. And there's a sense of freedom in that, a release from the pressure of having to maintain this facade. In God's presence, we can be fully known and fully loved for who we are, not who we think we should be.
I love that it's so liberating to know that we don't have to have it all together when we come to God.
Yeah.
He sees us, he knows us, and he loves us anyway.
And maybe that's part of the reason why Moses' face shone in the first place. It wasn't just about the glory of God radiating outwards, but it was also about the transformation that happens when we allow ourselves to be fully seen and known by him.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So the veil becomes this symbol of both our limitations and our potential.
I like that.
It reminds us that we can only approach God, through this lens of faith.
Mm-hmm.
But it also encourages us to strive for greater intimacy and transparency in our relationship with him.
It's a beautiful paradox,
Yes, it is.
We need the veil to protect us, but we also need to remove it to truly connect with God.
And this whole idea of approaching God authentically, maybe there's a lesson there for how we share our faith with others.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
Well, not everyone is ready for the full radiance of God's truth. You know what I mean?
That's so true.
Right.
We need to be sensitive to the veils that others might be wearing, the fears, the doubts, the preconceptions that might prevent them from seeing God clearly.
It's not about bombarding people with theological arguments,
Yeah.
or trying to force our beliefs on them. It's about meeting them where they are and gently inviting them to consider, a different perspective.
Yeah, exactly. It's about creating spaces of safety and trust where people can encounter God's truth at their own pace and in their own way.
And that requires so much patience
It does.
and humility and respect for the other person's journey. Everyone's at a different stage in their spiritual development.
Speaking of journeys, let's shift our focus back to the broader context of the Sinai Covenant.
Okay.
My Christian space really emphasizes this interplay between God's grace and our responsibility.
Yeah, it's a two-way street.
It is.
God freely offers his love and protection, but he also expects his people to respond with obedience and faithfulness.
It's like a divine dance
It is.
where both partners are actively participating.
And that dance is reflected in the structure of the covenant itself.
Right. God lays out his expectations, the commandments, the feasts, the rituals, but he also provides the means for people to fulfill those expectations.
Yes, he empowers them through his presence, his guidance, and his forgiveness.
It's not about earning God's favor through our own efforts. It's about responding to his grace with a willingness to align our lives with his will.
This whole concept of transformation, of being shaped into a people who reflect God's character, that's really at the heart of the Sinai Covenant, isn't it?
It is. It's not just about following rules. It's about becoming more like God, developing the qualities of love, justice, mercy, compassion.
Right.
It's about allowing God to work in us, to refine us, to shape us into the people he created us to be.
And that transformation happens gradually over time through a combination of divine grace and human effort.
Theologians call this sanctification the ongoing work of God's Spirit in our lives,
Right.
shaping us to be more like Christ. It's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy.
There are going to be challenges, setbacks, maybe even failures along the way.
Of course, but even in those moments, God's grace is sufficient. He never gives up on us.
Right.
Even when we stumble.
That's so encouraging to hear. It's a reminder that we're not alone in this journey. God is with us every step of the way, guiding us, supporting us, and loving us unconditionally.
And that's the beauty of the Sinai Covenant. It's not just this historical agreement between God and a specific group of people. It's a timeless story that speaks to our own relationship with God.
Right.
It reminds us of his enduring love, our call to obedience, and the transformative power of his grace.
I think what's resonating with me most is that Even though the Sinai Covenant was established thousands of years ago, it's still relevant today.
It is.
It's like a blueprint for how we can live in right relationship with God and with each other.
It's a blueprint for a life of meaning and purpose, a life that reflects God's character in the world.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Let's take a minute to recap some of the key insights from our deep dive into Exodus 34.
Yeah, we started with those broken tablets, a symbol of a broken relationship.
Right?
But, God offers this chance for renewal. He reveals his character to Moses, highlighting his mercy, his compassion, his grace.
We explored the idea of inherited sin and the whole complexities of free will.
Right.
And we saw how Moses' response to God's revelation was pure worship, this recognition of God's worthiness.
And then we delved into the Sinai Covenant, this pivotal agreement between God and his people. We unpacked some of the specifics, like the feasts and the prohibition against idolatry.
Well, we spent a good amount of time reflecting on the symbolism of the veil.
Yeah, how it represents our human limitations when we're faced with God's glory, but also the potential for intimacy and vulnerability in our relationship with him.
And throughout all of it, we've seen this beautiful interplay of grace and responsibility, divine revelation, and human response.
It's a story about transformation, about God shaping a people for his purposes.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with something to ponder. Remember how the Ten Commandments, the very core of the Sinai Covenant, were written on stone?
Yeah, symbolizing their permanence.
Their immutability.
Right.
And then Moses had to cover his radiant face with a veil when presenting those very commandments to the people.
So the question for you is this.
Yes. What do you think it means for us today that these commandments were written on stone, signifying this permanence? Yet Moses had to cover his radiant face with a veil when presenting them to the people. What might that tell us about how we approach God's laws and how we communicate them to others?
We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Share your reflections on our social media pages. We can't wait to continue the conversation.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Exodus 34. Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep exploring the depths of God's Word.